Tantric Advaita is, you can say, the knowledge on the non-dual energy. When we talk about non-duality, we are mostly talking about non-dual consciousness, but this consciousness definitely, it also has an energy, it has a feeling, which is usually referred to as bliss. And so this bliss is an integral part of the self. The self is as much a consciousness as it is a pure beingness, as it is a pure feelingness. Then once we understand the self, once we can somewhat stop our thoughts, once we can be present, aware of our awareness, all these things I'm sure you have heard before, then automatically a little smile, it comes on our face, right? So that is the bliss that shows there itself. When then we try to make non-duality part of our life, that mostly means that we want to keep feeling like that. I mean, it's not so difficult to have a sense of the self. We can hear a nice lecture, we can read a nice book, or maybe when we are in nature, or something like that, easily we get that feeling. But also very easily it gets lost. And when that feeling gets lost, we feel we have lost the self. Which is of course impossible, because the self is always there in our presence. It's who we are, so we can't really lose ourselves. But that feeling, we can lose it. And so that is what sometimes makes it difficult, what sometimes makes it frustrating. And okay, then we have all kinds of things that we can do to kind of bring that feeling back, bring that pure consciousness back. But yeah, it is not easy. So this is the question where I think Tantric Advaita really offers us the answer. How can we bring back the energy of the self? And maybe more importantly, how can we keep it? How can we make it stable? How can we keep feeling it? And so there, Tantric Advaita offers us many means that are all based on these famous seeds within the self. They are the seeds from which the entire universe has manifested and are related to the Sat Chit Ananda aspects of the self, and which are at the same time also offering us gateways back to the self, back to the bliss, back to the energy of non-duality, which is of course basically a matter of identification. The problem that we have when, let's say, some unpleasant emotion comes is that we identify with it, that this emotion becomes so powerful that we get fooled by it and lose our detachment, lose our non-duality, and again, from the ego, start getting involved with something in a way that is then, making us totally lose reality, totally lose the self. And so that understanding of the seeds of the self is so very important, because when we say that the self is Sat Chit Ananda, then that translates as Sat being the beingness, the presence, you can say, Chit being that pure consciousness, and Ananda being that bliss. And then we also see in the ancient texts that these three words are often written as one word to very clearly indicate how these three aspects of the self are one, and really belong together. And that if we lose one of them, then yes, we get that feeling of losing the self. So then the bliss is important. The pure, wordless, silent consciousness is important. And the presence is important. And remembering also that the objective of yoga, the reason why we do all these things, the reason why we meditate, is because we have a particular desire, which is a little bit special. It is a desire to be happy, independent of what happens. Normally, happiness and unhappiness, they are affected by whatever happens, whatever is there, whatever is going, whatever is coming. But so after playing life for a while, we feel, okay, I'm done with always fluctuating between happy and unhappy. And I want something to hold on to, which will give me this kind of more permanent, enduring happiness. And then when we search for the source of that, that is where we then find the self. So it's very important to always remember that this is what we seek. We're in it for the bliss. If the self would just give us like a kind of neutral, empty feeling, then I don't think many people would be interested. But so, of course, that is not true. When we find the self, when we are closely connected to the heart, then that smile comes, that bliss comes, and that's what we are after. Purnamada Purnamidam. This illustration is a mind map of the self. A little help, don't take it too seriously, to kind of understand what the self is about. And so when we then find the self, there's a number of things that we realize about it. And the first thing, of course, that we realize is that this is a consciousness. But a consciousness that is beyond thinking. A consciousness that precisely is still there when we can stop thinking. So that means it is a non-dual consciousness. No? The moment we go into words, we enter duality. But when we are in that pure consciousness, no more words there, and non-duality is there. We move beyond opposites. And because we move beyond opposites, the self also is formless. Because it has no more quality. We cannot say that the self is big or small, or that it is blue or yellow. We cannot say if it is old or young. We cannot even say if it is happy or unhappy. All these things, no, all these dualities, they disappear. And we find the self to be there as a kind of formless presence. You can say like an invisible cloud, no? And it is invisible, yes, but it is still there. No? And precisely because it has no form, it also cannot change. Because the only thing that can change is again within duality, from a form becoming bigger, becoming smaller, becoming more bright, becoming more dark, etc. So that self is in that way never changing, which also makes it true, which makes it an absolute reality. No? If something always changes, then we cannot say it is true, because it appears now like this and then it disappears, and so it's untrue. But the self, because it is never changing, is true. And because it is never changing, also it is beyond desire. It has no desire, because desire is always about changing something. So when then it is without desire, and that means it is in peace and in bliss. And because it is without desire and in peace and in bliss, it truly sees. Because as long as we are not in peace, not in bliss, then we do not truly see. Then we see what we want to see. Then we see what we seek. But once we can move beyond that, our pure consciousness really becomes omniscient. We then really, truly see everything. And then from this seeing also comes the real doing, which makes the self omnipotent. With the real seeing, we can do anything. And because the self is omnipotent, and in that way also, cannot be excluded from any kind of doing, is always there whenever there's a kind of doing present, then it is also omnipresent. And because it is omnipresent, which means it is everywhere, in everything, then it also is unborn. It is not something which comes and goes. It is something eternal. So, okay, this explains a little bit what the self is, even though it is, of course, something which is totally beyond words. And even here in these words, now we have to always understand that whenever we enter in that game of words, that we enter duality. So the only way to speak about the self is to say nothing at all. So, but okay, here we get some idea. And in this illustration, you see behind the words these arrows which are making a circular motion, which indicate that all these parameters or qualities of the self are entirely interrelated and interdependent. You take out one of them, the whole thing collapses. So I'm not going to go into that, but it's something for you maybe to study a little bit, what these things are that are there and how they are all related to each other. Like, for example, being formless relates to being never changing, and never changing means to be desireless, and so on. This is quite important, because if you understand this relationship between all these aspects of the self, it will also become much more easy for you to always find the self and know what is like missing, or know what is standing in the way of sensing the self, of merging with the self. Purnamada Purnamidam. We remember, okay, we're in it for the bliss, but that bliss so easily goes. And then we can ask ourselves, why is that? And the answer is quite simple. That bliss is a feeling. That bliss is an energy. But the nature of energy, and therefore also of feeling, is that it is ever changing. That is just how it is. That is its nature. And so all the time, this bliss of the self is, you can say, disturbed by feelings that come from other aspects of us. So here we see how we are made, you can say, as individuals. We see the self at the very center. There we are all exactly same. But the self is covered by many layers, named the Sheaths of Consciousness. Briefly explaining, around that self there is the body of bliss, which is not the same thing as the self, but it is the feeling of the self as it manifests inside of us. And around that is the entire subconscious mind, which has many, many different aspects, and which is mostly filled with past impressions, which are also called karmic impressions, because they have an impact on our karma, but they definitely also have an impact on our feeling, of course, where they produce all kinds of thoughts and desires and dislikes and all that. A lot of what is happening inside of us actually comes from the subconscious, from the deepest level of our being, from our soul, whichever you want to name it, and that then not translate into the conscious mind, into all these thoughts that we have in a day. And okay, these thoughts are a matter of, yes, thinking, but definitely also there is a feeling element to our thoughts. We will dig more into that when we go into solar and lunar energies and solar and lunar thinking. But you can say that a little bit like on social media, there's thumbs up and thumbs down. Also in our thinking this happens, no? Some things we think and we like what we are thinking, and sometimes we think we don't like what we are thinking. So there definitely also is a feeling element there. And then surrounding that conscious mind comes the next sheet, which is called the pranic body, the energy body. And that is where we actually experience our gross emotions. When we are angry, we should actually say, oh, my pranic body is feeling anger. which is a little bit a different thing. No, or where we feel love, we can say, oh, my pranic body is totally going for it. That is where we experience these emotions. And actually there the pranic body is very particular in the sense that there the emotion can change very rapidly. From one minute to the other, we can go from love to anger, for example, or maybe vice versa. And so that is very particular to know also about the emotions. Once we start working with them, we know that actually they can be changed quite rapidly, at least there in the pranic body. And okay, that already gives us the direct feeling of it. But of course, it is not that easy, and especially not because, okay, there is the subconscious mind who might still resist that feeling that we are trying to generate. But there is also the physical body. The physical body made out of the 5 elements, and where there are numerous systems that interact with our pranic body, and in that way also with our thoughts, and even with the subconscious mind. Numerous systems like, for example, the neurotransmitters, the hormones, but also there are various organs which have a very important impact on our feelings. And you can say that actually the physical body is where feelings do not change so easily. And when a feeling of anger comes to the pranic body, maybe because of some thought in the conscious mind about, I don't know, an ex-girlfriend or something, then if the energy of the physical body is easily supporting anger, which actually relates to the fire element, then that anger will come very easily, very strongly. But if the body itself, let's say, is pretty cool and does not have much excess of the fire element, then it will be more difficult to become angry. So in that way, the physical body is definitely also something from which many feelings come and which affect many feelings, and especially how enduring they are. People who are, let's say, experiencing some difficult times and having some unpleasant emotions there for longer periods of time, they should never underestimate the physical body. Even if they can change their attitude, even if they can change, let's say, for example, through breathing, their raw emotion, then still some residue will be there in the physical body from the unpleasant emotions of the past. And if we don't work with that, then it will be very hard to maintain that new positive emotion that we are trying to generate. Then maybe some simple things like a change of diet or some asana practice or some running or is needed to get that energy out and to make sure the body supports also positive feelings. But it is clear that the bliss, yes, it is easy to lose it because energy changes in different aspects of our being and from there affects it. And okay, we can then always try to again refocus our awareness on our awareness and do all these things, but it may not be always that easy. And if it's easy, why talk about it? So if it is not easy, then we need to somehow work with the energy. And there I would say the subconscious is the biggest stumbling block. The conscious is relatively easy to handle with some good, let's say, information. The energy, the gross energy is relatively easy to handle with some breathing and stuff. The physical body may be a little more difficult, but okay, can be done. But then that subconscious, that is really something very special. People are not so aware often how the conscious and the subconscious continuously interact. You see many arrows in that illustration, and they're all going back to the subconscious and from there again to the conscious. So we tend to believe that our thinking is something over which we have a lot of control, but we also have to accept that in fact this control is quite limited, and that always some rather undefined feelings come floating to the surface of our conscious mind. They're usually first translated into a word, a concept maybe made out of 1 or 2 or 3 words, and that then leads to a train of thoughts, which is further made more, I would say, complicated by all kinds of associations and reasoning and things we've read, and all these stories then come up, and we think, okay, we got it covered and we're smart and we got it all under control, but actually the whole thing starts from something which is totally beyond our control, from a feeling that comes from inside of us. And if it's a happy feeling, okay, it's going to bring us happy thoughts. But if it's an unhappy feeling, it's going to create a chain of unhappy thoughts, which then, okay, sometimes also may be spoken out loud. No? But actually, this illustration is based upon the understanding of the development of speech that comes from Vedic science. No? Vak, this is called the 4 modes of speech. And so speech is only the last step, but actually all the time we are talking. No? In our mind, we are talking to ourselves, and very often also talking to other people. No? In our mind, trying to convince them of something or whatever. But so to get this under control is quite difficult, and this especially is true then when we try to meditate. When we try to stop the game. When we try to stop thinking, and we try to stop feeling all kinds of things and wanting all kinds of things and doing all kinds of things, when we really want to experience the self in its most pure form, which is what meditation is all about, then very clearly the subconscious is the one who is going to make it hard, no? And bring up all kinds of things, maybe quite nonsensical things sometimes, but also sometimes quite strong emotions, and we can't stop thinking about that work we lost, or whatever. This is the subconscious, no? Because something is there, some energy you can say is there, disturbed. It becomes like a trigger, something triggers it and it comes out. And so the more we try to empty the conscious mind, the more the subconscious mind will try to fill it. Because as long as we are thinking a lot, then the subconscious, it doesn't have so much a power to influence us. Except if something really powerful is triggered maybe, but otherwise, no, it lets the conscious mind do what it wants. It wants to think, okay. But when the conscious mind tries to stop thinking, that is then where the subconscious comes up quite dominantly, no? So we should not underestimate the task that we are giving ourselves here, no? Because the subconscious is there and is beyond our consciousness, is beyond our control. Definitely, no? If we say we are working with Tantric Advaita, then this means 2 things. It means, okay, like everybody who is involved with non-duality, we focus our awareness on our awareness, which is a matter of identification. Whatever happens, we try to keep a distance. We try not to identify with it. We try not to get fooled by it. And that is something which we do with our conscious mind. That is where we try to think, let's say, truth, and not get caught by untruth. But the other part of Tantric Advaita is very much to do with our energy. Tantra basically means to change the energy, but especially to do with the subconscious mind, where our conscious mind cannot so easily reach. Other means are available to calm that snake of the subconscious, which is part also here in the reptile brain, and to calm the deepest levels of our soul, and from there more durably experience the bliss of the self. And honestly, there is a lot of confusion about it. And I see that in some students and in some patients also who come for healing, a kind of confusion about non-duality that, oh, you should not try to do anything. You should not do any kind of practice. The whole thing is about not trying anything, not thinking, about stopping, bringing the awareness to the awareness, and all else is then seen as an ego game, a distraction from the real work. Where does this come from? This idea that once we have discovered this beautiful cosmic self that we all are, why is that then that people say, oh, but if you want that, then that is the only thing you can work with. And don't think about your food, don't do any yoga asana, don't do any breath, don't do any mantra, don't do any chanting, don't do anything like that. Where is this coming from? Well, if we look at, let's say, modern non-duality teachers, then we can see that they are mostly influenced by some very important teachers from the past century in India, namely mostly Ramana Maharishi and Nisargadatta Maharaj. And if you look at those teachings which are widely available, then very clearly there, whatever question is being asked, Ramana, for example, he will always first and foremost bring you back to the self, point out the illusion, and bring you out of your delusion of trying to change something to the essence. And if you can reach that essence, then okay, nothing needs to be changed actually. And the same with Nisargadatta Maharaj, maybe even a little bit more strict even. Sometimes I think quite hard for people when he speaks, but okay, he speaks truth for sure. And he is always bringing people back to that essence. But we have to see what these teachers were trying to do and where they were bringing this message. At that time in India, people, of course, they had a basic understanding of the self, but they were also very much involved with working with the energy. And then Ramana, Nisargadatta, and so on must have thought that they are really too much involved with working with the energy. If you go into India, you see the bells, you see the chanting, you see the temples, you see the flowers, you see the asana, you see all kinds of things. And then, for sure, people there tend to forget the essence, and get lost in all these, you can say, energetic practices. So that is, I think, then why teachers like Ramana and Nisargadatta, they say, oh, stop there. Remember the essence. Always focus on the truth. Don't be fooled. And they are very right. But so they were bringing this, I would say, emphasis on only relying on self-awareness in a society, and especially then among people involved with yoga and meditation and all that, in a society which maybe was a little bit too much hung up, you can say, on all kinds of energetic practices. But so then we have our modern non-duality teachers who bring this same message, I would say maybe even with more enthusiasm, into a society of modern people, usually Western people, but okay, that's more or less covering the whole world now, in a society where there is no practice. And there is very little knowledge about practice. Very few people know how to breathe. Very few people have a good idea about what food is doing to their feeling and to their ability to reconnect to the self and to be peaceful and to be blissful and so on. So that is the main problem. People these days now, they are involved more and more. Now this is a growing thing, which is very good. Involved more and more in Yeah, yogic practices, asana, pranayam, these things, chanting mantra, these things. But then when they get into non-duality, they feel, oh, I have to drop all that. No, please, no, that is really not the idea. No, and even if you look at Ramana, for example, and you look a little bit more into the detail of what he is saying, there he will also point to certain energetic practices, and especially then when people come and say, oh, Ramana, your vichara, your self-study and self-awareness, I have tried to sit and not think, but I just can't. Thoughts keep coming, and I can't find that peace, I can't find that bliss. Then Ramana will say, oh, maybe you have to do a little bit more breathing. No? Focus on your breath and calm your breath, and maybe then it will work. And then when people come back and say, oh, I've tried, I've done the breathing and I've tried, but it doesn't work, then maybe you say, oh, maybe something is bothering you from a little more deep inside. Maybe first you try some mantra, and then you try focusing on the self and not thinking. And when then people come back and say, oh, I've tried that also now, but it still doesn't work, then, and that's very funny actually, then he says, maybe you need a holiday. So very clearly there, he knows people in India, they know these things. So he doesn't really have to say that, but if people then really say, oh, it doesn't work for me, this pure focus only on pure beingness, on the self, then he'll also point them towards those things in their energy that they might change to simply make it more easy. And so then if we look at Nisargadatta, very interestingly, the last book that came out, from the last talks that he gave before leaving his body, there he basically equates the self to the prana. The prana is the life force. The prana is the energy. If there is any place where we actually feel our emotions, that is in the pranic body. I just explained that. So to equate the self to that which is so clearly an energy and a feeling, that was for me something which really made a huge difference. And I suddenly understood, okay, these guys know Tantric Advaita. They know the relationship between working with the energy and working with the self. Only they don't want to talk about it too much because people are already, and quite naturally in a way, too much focused on it. So there are many, many pointers in that direction. For example, one of the main students of Ramana, Ganapati Muni, he created a beautiful book called Uma Sahasram, which is, you can say, a book about non-duality, but totally from a tantric perspective. And Ramana is even said to have dictated quite a big part of that book to his student. And his student is also referring to Ramana about this book. So you find many, many pointers there. And even if you go back much more in time to Adi Shankara, who is, you can say, the more modern founder of non-duality. Okay, modern, in the 8th century actually he lived, so he's not that modern. But still really created Advaita as we know it today. Then you can say, okay, he is there, but he is also doing many other things. And he created, for example, a great work on the 5 elements, which are, again, a practice which is very much to do with energy, very much to do with feeling, very much to do with the body. And he's also regarded as a great specialist in that aspect. So I must say, for me, this whole discussion was a little bit strange because, well, for almost 20 years now, I was so much focused on Harish Johari, and with him, there had never been any kind of opposition between working with consciousness or working with energy. That had always seemed like one and the same thing. Quite simply, we focus our awareness on the truth, and at the same time, we play with the energy. And so that makes it also easier to keep the truth inside, and also makes life, I would say, more rewarding, more fun. So Harish Johar was very much about fun, actually. So it was only after he left his body, and then I started looking at some other teachers, and yes, reading quite a lot at that time, that I saw, that there was a lot of confusion about it. But for me, this had never been so. So I've always been quite interested to understand this more deeply, to study Tantra more deeply, to study also in very practical way to become a tantric healer. All these things were actually part of that search to find where is that practice or attitude which is most suitable for most people, actually, because that, of course, is also part of the story, that we are all individuals. We are the self, and in that way we are all the same, and we are all seeking the same. And in that way we don't even need to seek, we don't need a path, we don't need a process, because the self is what we are. It is always there in our presence. But definitely in staying in that presence, in staying in that pure awareness, there is a process, and this is a process of letting go. And the letting go is of our individuality. And so that means for everybody it's always a little different. So we have to find our own way. So let's just say that this whole discussion about should I only focus on the self, or can I also work like simultaneously with my energy, it is a useless discussion, but which actually has happened many times. You can see also, for example, when Buddha, who was a Hindu, he came, in his story, he was also a little bit trying to bring people away from a lot of the practices that they were doing and focusing them on the self, which he called the Buddha nature. So this is very much the same. And then in Buddhism we see a whole evolution where also again different energetic practices are there. I would say even the most in Tibetan Buddhism, for example, and where then Zen Buddhists, they are more the ones who always bring up the self and always try to focus you on the self and not to get you involved with too much else. So this is an endless discussion, which I've called useless here, because it does not matter. If you can solve any unhappy feeling just by stopping your mind and going back to the awareness of your awareness, then okay, that's what you do, of course. But if you cannot, then that is also okay, because then you can work with the energy until again it becomes possible. It's really as simple as that, so it should not be any kind of discussion. These two parts of the story, these two ways to work with the truth, are entirely complementary. We do not have to choose. It is not one or the other. Both go together quite naturally. So many teachers, also Ramana very definitely, Papaji also, for example, who was a student of Ramana, whenever questions like that were asked, their answer was always, please behave naturally. If you are hungry, eat. If you are tired, sleep. If you feel you can help somebody, help somebody. Behave naturally. Behaving naturally means working with the energy, because that is the only thing which you actually can do with nature. Nature has this tendency, whether we talk about nature outside of us or nature inside of us in terms of, our body and our whole system here, it has its ways, it has its fluctuations, it has its changes. And so, behaving naturally means that we maybe a little bit counterbalance any imbalance that comes, and, in that way make it so much easier to stay with the truth, to stay with the self. So it's all a matter of attachment. Of course, let's say if you start working with your food, because you understand that this is something which affects your energy and affects your feeling, then this can become a huge frustration also, because it's not so easy. It's something you have to learn, and bit by bit you learn it. But so in that process, you might become frustrated because you are attaching to it. You want to obtain a certain feeling, like you want to cook a meal and afterwards feel really good and light and not so heavy like a lot of meals are doing. No? They are making us feel very heavy, and then how to feel good, how to feel the self is difficult. So, but then maybe you cook something and you think it should be great, but actually it's not that great. It still doesn't work so well on you somehow. No, we are all there again, individuals having different body types and so on. So it's a learning process. And so whenever in that process, whenever we work with the energy, when we start having some expectation, when we start attaching to the feeling that we want to generate, then we create a problem. That is the only thing that we have to avoid. But that does not mean we cannot work with the energy. And so, as I said before, the keys to working with our energy are found within the self itself. They are the seeds of the universe, but from which also all the yogic and tantric practices for working with the energy originate. And so, if we want that feeling of the self, if we want that non-duality not to be something which just occasionally like comes when we were having a good moment or hearing a good talker talk about it, when we want it to be more enduring, then that is where we have to look. Purnamada Purnamidam Purnamidam